I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'll call the 3 p.m. session of the April 28, 2020 meeting of the Henry County Board of Supervisors to order. I'd like to welcome all visitors. Remind you, if you want to be placed specifically on the agenda, you'll need to contact the County Administrator's Office at least 7 days in advance. Normally, we would have a matters presented by the public as part of our agenda, but as publicly stated and notified with article in the bulletin, any prior matters presented by the public was to be emailed to the County Administrator's Office. Again, welcome. Our first item of business today is an item of consent. What is the pleasure of the board?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the items of consent be approved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor? It is 6-0, Mr. Hall. Agenda item number 6 will take up financial matters. 6A, award of contract referencing construction materials for the Adult Detention Center. Mr. Hall.
As part of the ongoing cost-saving measures for construction of the Adult Detention Center, staff has recommended that the county purchase many of the materials and supplies needed for construction directly from the vendor. In addition to the vendors previously approved by the board, it has been determined that there is only one source practically available for the materials and supplies contract noted below relative to the construction of the Adult Detention Center and pursuant to Section 2.2-43-3E of the Code of Virginia. And that vendor is Allied Protective Glazing, LLC, for some security glazing, cost of $135,000. And this does not alter the total cost of the construction of the facility.
Okay, thank you. With that, what is the pleasure of the board in regard to the awarding of this contract?
Mr. Chairman, I recommend the board award the sole source contract to Allied Protective Glazing, LLC for materials and supplies needed in the construction of the Henry County Adult Detention Facility.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor? Is 6-0, Mr. Hall. 6B, an additional appropriation and authorization of purchase referencing the Fire Programs Fund for Public Safety. Mr. Hall.
Public Safety Director Matt Tatum is asking the board to appropriate funds in the amount of $194,524 received from the Virginia Department of Fire Programs Aids to Localities Fund. The Emergency Services Advisory Council, or ESAC, is recommending the funds be used by Horse Pasture Fire Department to purchase a new tanker-style fire truck. Staff is also asking the board to authorize the disbursement of funds to Horse Pasture to purchase a new tanker-style fire truck from Fouts Brothers Incorporated. The county's purchasing department is recommending the award of purchase to Fouts Brothers after a thorough evaluation of the proposals. And Mr. Tatum is here should you have any questions.
Ms. Buchanan, I believe this piece of equipment is designated for your area. If you would like to comment or offer a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the additional appropriation of fire program funds in the amount of $194,524 and authorize the disbursement of the funds to the Horse Pasture Fire Department for the purchase of a new tanker-style fire truck from Fouts Brothers Incorporated.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor? Is 6-0, Mr. Hall. 6C, an award of contract referencing legislative liaison services. Mr. Hall.
Staff is asking the board to award a contract in the amount of $20,000 to Dragonfly Consulting, LLC for work as the county's legislative liaison from July 1, 2020 to April 30th, 2021. The full scope of services is in the proposed contract that's in your working papers. Staff has established a good working relationship with the principals of this company. Staff believes the company has done outstanding work for Henry County in the past. Therefore, we recommend awarding the contract as outlined.
Okay, there's a significant amount of background material that the board has as a part of its working paper, recapping what is expected of them and what some of the highlights of what's been done in the past. What's the pleasure of the board?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board award the contract to Dragonfly Consulting or renew the contract as outlined in the working papers.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Mr. Hall,
Yes, sir.
what was the cost last year?
This is actually cheaper than we paid in two different dips
That's what
last
I
year.
thought.
Now, previously, they did work for us on the I-73 coalition. We paid them $18,000 a year for that. And then last year, towards the end of the year, we added the Dragonfly, and that was $9,000. So combined, it was $27,000.
That's what I
So this
thought.
is actually the same level of service for less money.
Thank you.
Any other discussion or questions? All in favor? It's 6-0, Mr. Hall. 6D, award of contract referencing the feasibility study for the Fieldale Recreation Center for the Planning, Zoning, and Inspections Department. Mr. Hall.
Lee Clark, our Director of Planning, Zoning, and Inspections, is asking the board to award a contract to Summit Design and Engineering Services of Hillsborough, North Carolina, in the amount of $45,000 for the development of a feasibility study for the Fieldale Recreation Center. Funds for the project were previously appropriated from a grant from the Appalachian Regional Commission.
Ms. Buchanan, I believe also this sits within your district.
It does. Mr. Chairman, I move that we award the contract to Summit Design and Engineering Services, PLLC, in the amount of $45,000 for the Fieldale Recreation Center feasibility study.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor? It's 6-0, Mr. Hall. 6E, an award of contract referencing the Lodging Facilities Market Feasibility Study for the Planning, Zoning, and Inspections Department. Mr. Hall.
Lee Clark, our Director of Planning, Zoning, and Inspections, is asking the board to award a contract in the amount of $30,000 to Thomas P. Miller and Associates for the development of a Martinsville, Henry County Regional Opportunity Zone Hotel and Lodging Facilities Market Feasibility Study and Prospectus. Funds for the project were previously appropriated from the Department of Housing and Community Development grant. And let me add parenthetically, this is part of the ongoing home lodging study and child care study and transportation study that we've been doing for well over a year. And this allows us to get some planning done to see how we can tap into opportunity zones. Opportunity zones are a federal program, relatively new, that provides a tax break for investors. After a 7-year period, you basically are done with your tax obligation on those investments. And we're hopeful that we can reach out to not only identify where and when we need something from a lodging standpoint, but also to help us to identify potential investors in the opportunity zone.
Okay, thank you. What is the pleasure of the board in regard to awarding of this contract?
Mr. Chairman, I recommend that awarding contract to Thomas P. Miller and Associates in the amount of $30,000 to develop a lodging facility market feasible study and prospects.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor? It's 6-0, Mr. Hall. Agenda item number 7, I have informational items. We'll start with comments from the board, beginning with Mr. Zaire.
No, sir.
Dr. Martin.
No, sir.
Mr. Bryant.
No, sir.
Ms. Buchanan.
No, sir.
Mr. Slaughter.
No, sir.
I have none. Mr. Hall.
I've got a list. I knew we would probably have some time to go over some things. I want to kind of give you guys an update on where we are with regard to reaction to the COVID-19 situation, from a staffing standpoint, from a morale standpoint, that sort of thing, and kind of give you some update on that. We have, with its last several weeks, we have halted any discretionary spending. In other words, if it's not tied to an operational need, we have asked our department heads to hold off on buying things at this point. We have halted travel. We have implemented a hiring freeze unless it's in a position that is essential. So, for instance, law enforcement or public safety, we do not want to hinder those operations at this point. But otherwise, unless that process was already underway and you'd already interviewed people, we've asked folks not to proceed with hiring anybody. We have not entertained any furloughs or layoffs. I don't think we need to do that at this point. We'll see, but my plan at this point is to not entertain those. We did go to an operational schedule where some departments had the privilege or had the purview of having some folks work at home on alternate days. We had an hour-long Zoom meeting with our department heads this morning, and it was very, it reinforced a lot of what I think about our folks, is that whatever you give them, they adapt to make it work. We are seeing some efficiencies from folks working at home. particularly within some legal issues. I know George told us on the call this morning that a lot of the court cases are not being held, but they're just as efficient online, doing them through video conferencing. We have several other departments that are on and off. They want to come back to work, which I found out this morning. Our folks don't like working at home. They want to be here, which I think speaks well of them. We are tracking our costs related to the COVID-19 process. Matt Tatum and his department are tracking our costs. There is a chance that we can get reimbursed about 75% of our costs from FEMA. But it's imperative that they be tracked appropriately and the backing data and the supporting data be tracked along with that. And Matt and his guys are doing that along with a whole. A physical impact on us. Our main avenues of income are sales tax, meals tax, things like that. Property taxes are paid in December, so that has not really shown an impact. A lot of localities have them paid twice a year, and I think they're seeing some impact from that. But those numbers usually lag about 6 to 8 weeks from moment of point of sale to when we get the number. So we really haven't seen that yet. Anecdotally, I would anticipate our revenue to be down perhaps 20 to 25%. And that's really just a wild guess because we have nothing other than talking to people to see what their impact has been. But once those numbers start to show up, if we have to make further adjustments, then we'll certainly do that. But everything that I've asked our folks to do, they have done. And one of the questions I had of them on the call this morning is how's morale? Because when you're not around other people, you don't get a sense of it because we're all working in our offices or in our homes. And to a department, they all said that morale was good, surprisingly good in a couple of cases. And I know specifically with Matt, and certainly Matt can speak to this if he wishes to, Matt's folks are covered up with work and expectation, just like the 911 dispatchers and the sheriff's office. What we are finding, surprisingly, is that call volumes are down. Not substantially, but they are down over what the historical data would indicate, both with the sheriff's office and with public safety, run calls, that sort of thing. Normally, when folks are shut in for a while, like a snowstorm or something, and I think Sheriff could probably back me up on this, that's when a lot of stuff happens because you're tired of being inside with the people that you're inside with. But they have not seen that to this point, and I think that speaks well of the folks who live here. We're going to ask that we continue holding off on spending because we really know we don't have any idea where this will bottom out. So we're going to do our very best to spend no more than we have to spend of any kind of discretionary spending. We're going to sit on that money as tightly as we can sit on it. And if things loosen up in 6 months and we can do some things that we've held off on, then we'll consider it at that point. But I really think it's incumbent upon us to stand down on anything of an expenditure nature that we don't absolutely have to have. And that's what we've directed our folks to do. Now with regard to the budget, you have in front of you an amended budget calendar that we would ask that you take action on to approve. The only real differences from what we had approved earlier, the work session on the school budget and the total county budget, that was in April, and the first iteration of this schedule. We're recommending moving that to May 7th at 5 p.m. This is a unique budget. You've had it for a while. If the board wants to entertain perhaps having a Zoom budget work session or going without one at all and just sending us your questions, that's certainly within the board's purview. But we put it on the schedule for May the 7th. We have to meet certain advertising guidelines by the Code of Virginia. So we would advertise a public hearing in the media on May the 10th. That public hearing would be held on May the 18th at 7 p.m. We're going to try something different with the public hearing. We're not going to allow the public in. But we've already set up 2 ways for folks to get us their comments. One is through a special email address, which is budget2020@co.henry.va.us, and we will promo these extensively. But anyone who has a comment on the budget can email that to us, and then at the public hearing, we will read that into the record. We've also set up a telephone number where someone can call and give us their budget opinion, and we will transcribe those and enter those as well. And that phone number is 634-4699. And Dale and I both have access to both of those. We're the only two that have access to those. And we will produce those comments and enter them into the record at the public hearing. But we will heavily promote this. It goes against our nature to have a public input session without folks in the room, and it's not ideal, and I don't want to ever do it again. But we think unless things are relaxed by then, that this is the best way to approach that. So I guess I'm looking for you're okay with those changes in how we will function, and then a formal vote to adopt the budget calendar if you want to adopt it as we presented it, or if you want to make any changes to it and then put it to a vote, that would work as well. And one last thing, from an operational standpoint, the new compactors at Ridgeway's Convenience Center site are up and running. They started today. I went out and looked at the site. The site is very well laid out. The folks that I saw from a distance, I didn't talk to anybody, but it seemed like it was flowing really well. The site monitors were doing a good job of directing folks. This is the second one that we have that has compactors. The other one is at Axton. We had planned to have a couple more in the budget for next year. Those are on the sidelines. They're still in the CIP, but we're not asking anyone to fund those at this point. But if Ridgeway goes as well as Axton has gone, and I think it will, we would like to come back to you at some point to expand the program of compactors, because it works out. It's cheaper for us in the long run, and it's cleaner at the sites, and gets people in and out pretty easy.
Great, thank you. I'd like to offer, before we take up the adoption of the amended budget calendar, just a couple of comments to the board. As I have observed in a number of years past, Mr. Buchanan or any of the rest of you jump in here, we've come back for a budget work session and we've all had our binders and we'll thumb through revenue, which right now is a great unknown, and we may have a few questions as we thumb through from section to section. But I don't recall a work session that lasted over 20 minutes from start to finish, unless we had additional business. And I'd like to hear you all, before we adopt this, as to whether or not you see a benefit of doing that versus maybe sending your comments to Mr. Hall.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen a budget where we actually changed anything during a work session.
Not
So,
really.
I mean, I'm fine with, if we have comments, sending them to Mr. Hall prior to, and then just doing away with the budget work session. I really see no need.
We pretty
We've all
much
had a
know
chance
what the
to
budget
review
is
our
going to
manuals.
be. It's going to be flat for now. And any comments, as Mr. Hall said, we'll send them to him and he can address them. I don't have a problem.
Mr. Slaw?
Yeah.
I don't have a problem doing it, what's
Right.
you say it.
I don't have a problem with it either. It's obvious that the budget's not really gonna change any this year, you know, for the reasons of coronavirus, you know, so.
Dr. Martin?
I don't have a problem with it if Tim gets questions, if you would just copy all of us on the response, because it may be something we have thought about, but, you know, didn't verbalize.
We will copy you in the legally allowable manner.
Correct, I understand
A
that.
reply all could be construed as a meeting, so we won't.
I
do that.
understand.
With that, and sensing that you all are in agreement with removing May 7th from this amended budget calendar, what's the pleasure of the board as far as adopting this amended budget calendar?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt the budget calendar with an amendment of May 7th be deleted.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor? Is 6-0. Mr. Hall, do you have any other items prior to going to closed meeting?
No, sir, I do not.
With that, I'll accept a motion of, if someone would so choose, to cite the items allowing us to go into closed meeting.
Mr. Chairman, I move the board convene in a closed meeting as permitted under the following sections of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, 2.23711A1, for discussion of appointees to the Parks and Recreation Board, Planning Commission, Patriot Center, CCBC Advisory Board, Economic Development Corporation, Patrick Henry Community College, Henry Martinsville Department of Social Services Board, Piedmont Regional Community Services Board, and Southern Area Agency on Aging Board. Section 2.2, 3711A7 for discussion of pending legal matters. Section 2.2, 3711A5 for discussion of as yet unannounced industries.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor? It is 6-0. See everyone upstairs. Meeting on a motion by
I didn't
Mr.
try.
Zare, second by Ms. Buchanan. Mr. Hall, will you certify the board?
Do you certify that in closed session you discussed only lawfully cited and exempted matters used in the motion to enter closed session? Mr. Zager?
Yes, sir.
Dr. Martin?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Bryan?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Buchanan?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Slaughter?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Adams?
Yes, sir. Mr. Bryan, I believe you have an appointment for the board's consideration for the Planning Commission.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. I'd recommend us reappointing Paul Setliff, Richard Reynolds, and Herman Haley to the Planning Commission Board for 4 years. Expiration date's going to be March the 31st of 2024.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor? It's 6-0, Mr. Hall. And Mr. Bryant, I believe that you also have for the board's consideration an appointment for the Henry Martinsville Department of Social Services Board.
Yes, sir, I do. I'd also make a motion that we reappoint Lee Cochran to the Henry Martinsville Department of Social Service Board for a 4-year term, and it also expires on May 31st of 2024.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor? It's 6-0, Mr. Hall. Mr. Hall, are there any other items of business the board needs to consider prior to adjourning? Board members, do you have any? Prior to, should we adjourn first before we do this? Okay?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to adjourn.
Sir,
Have
second.
a motion and a second. All in favor? 6-0.